region of the world goes by many different names, but the Middle East or Western Asia are the most common ones that we hear in the English language. Whatever you want to call it, it's an enormous place. When excluding Russia, the Middle East isn't just this monolithic thing that a lot of people in the West seem to think it is. It has huge divisions between different religious beliefs, big separations in different ethnic groups, and big divides in languages and dialects. Not to mention the massive difference in the location of strategic resources like oil and gas that make some areas wealthier than others. For most of our lifetimes, the Middle East has been incredibly unstable and violent. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of it has to do with how the Middle East borders are drawn. Here they are normally on a political map of the world, but seeing the borders like this doesn't really help to explain why they're not very good. Here they are placed instead over a religious map, where you can clearly see that in a lot of places they just don't match up very neatly. Places like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen are sharply divided between Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim majority areas, while Saudi Arabia and Iran, in contrast, are much more solid. Switch the religious map out for an ethnic map, and you can again see that a lot of these same places just don't match up very neatly. In this view, Syria and Iraq remain divided between Arabs and Kurds, along with even more divisions in Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan. And finally, let's switch out the ethnic map for a linguistic map, and specifically, a map of the various dialects of Arabic. Each of these regions is essentially a separate community inside of the greater Arabic world. But in a lot of other places in the Middle East specifically, just like with religion and ethnicity, the political borders of countries rarely line up neatly with the communal linguistic borders. The Iraqi, Levantine, North Mesopotamian, Gulf, and Najidi dialects of Arabic are all spread out across multiple countries, while Iraq, Syria, and Jordan are basically dialect mosaics. So, if most of the political borders inside of the Middle East don't line up with religious, ethnic, or even linguistic realities, then what are they actually there for? And why were they decided upon that way in the first place? The answer is, of course, because they were designed that way on purpose by people from outside of the Middle East in order to maximize the levels of chaos and unrest as much as possible. This is the problem with the Middle East's borders. The Turkish and Persian mapmakers could have never predicted the main cause of the future conflicts that placing Khuzestan east of this border would generate. Khuzestan is absolutely loaded with oil. It's so oil-rich in fact that just this single province alone generates 57% of all of Iran's entire oil production. The British were going to take over all of this stuff, the French were going to take over all of this stuff, the Italians were going to get all of this stuff, Armenia and Greece were going to get some token land tossed their way too, an independent state of Kurdistan for the ethnic Kurds was being discussed, Istanbul was going to be ruled by an international government, and whatever was left of Turkey itself was basically just going to be confined to a rump state here. A new treaty was signed, and this time ratified, that largely established the borders of the modern-day Republic of Turkey. The European powers were pretty much kicked out of Turkey itself, but all of the lands that the Ottomans once controlled outside of modern-day Turkey's borders were pretty much relentlessly pillaged. In a secret treaty signed in 1916 while the war was still going on, the British and the French agreed to divide the Middle East between themselves. The British were to gain Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Transjordan, while the French were going to take over northern Syria and most of the Levant. The boundary between their colonies was drawn here and became known as the Sykes-Picot Line, after the British and French diplomats who signed the terms. As a consequence, it largely cuts across various communal dialects of Arabic and has divided linguistic communities between two countries for over 100 years now. But the rest of the colonial borders that the Europeans came up with here were arguably much worse. Iraq's borders were drawn to keep Shia and Sunni Arabs as well as Kurds all locked together in the same state. The Shia make up the majority of the country and control nearly all of the oil in the south. But despite this, the minority Sunni dominated the Ba'ath Party that ruled Iraq from the 1960s until the fall of Saddam in 2003. The borders of Syria were also drawn in a way by the French to wedge the Shia and the Sunni Arabs as well as the Kurds all together into another divided country. And despite being the minority, the Alawites, an offshoot of Shia Islam, have effectively ruled the entire country for the past 40 years now. Despite being mostly Arab ethnically, Lebanon was also designed to keep the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Christians all sharply divided inside of the same country. All of these divisions were intentionally established by the British and the French in order to keep the people who lived there divided amongst themselves. And this is why the borders in the Middle East are so terrible. They were drawn to be terrible on purpose, and the consequences of those decisions are still seeing colossal ramifications and loss of life today. Recognizing this, some geopolitical theorists have drawn up borders of what a hypothetical redrawing of the Middle East's borders in the future might end up looking like. This map, created by Columbia University, gives us a glimpse into how tensions and unrest in Iraq and Syria might shatter the countries into 4 brand new states that follow the religious, ethnic, and linguistic lines a bit more realistically. In this hypothetical scenario, there would be a Shiite Arab state in the southeast, an Alawite Shiite Arab state in the west along the Mediterranean, a Sunni Arab state in between both of them, and an independent Kurdish state in the north. Only time will tell if the Middle East will ever see a massive political redrawing of the map like this.